They stripped his titles, they froze his income, they took his military honors and erased his name from the working royal rota. But they left him one thing, until now. The last privilege nobody noticed. He still had. There is a particular kind of institutional cruelty that operates not through dramatic announcements or public humiliations, but through the slow, deliberate removal of things so quietly embedded in a person's daily existence that neither they nor the people watching them fully register how much those things matter until the moment they are gone. It is the cruelty of subtraction rather than confrontation, and it is the method the British royal family has always preferred when it comes to managing one of its own. Clean on the surface, devastating underneath. Prince Andrew, Duke of York, has been on the receiving end of that method for years. But what happened in the early weeks of March 2026 represents something different in kind from everything that came before, because what was taken this time was not a title, not a patronage, not a ceremonial role that the public barely noticed he held. What was taken was access. Specifically, the one form of institutional access that had survived every previous stripping, every public disgrace, every legal crisis, and every palace reorganization of the past 6 years. And with its removal, the last thread connecting Andrew to the world he was born into has been cut. To understand what that access meant, you have to understand something about how the British royal family actually functions on a daily operational level beneath the ceremonial surface that most people see. The palace is not simply a building or a collection of buildings. It is a living institutional ecosystem with its own internal communication networks, briefing structures, staff relationships, and information flows. Senior members of the royal family, even those who have stepped back from public duties, even those whose public roles have been formally removed, retain within that ecosystem a degree of privileged access that is almost impossible to replicate from outside it. Access to internal briefings, access to secure communication channels, access to the physical spaces, the private rooms, the working areas of the palace where the actual business of the monarchy is conducted. Access, most significantly, to the people who run that business on a daily basis. The senior courtiers, the private secretaries, the advisors whose counsel shapes every significant decision the institution makes. For Andrew, that access had been quietly but unmistakably maintained even through the most difficult periods of his public downfall. When his military titles were removed in January 2022, his physical access to certain palace spaces was not simultaneously revoked. When his royal patronages were stripped, his relationships with senior palace staff were not formally severed. When he settled the Giuffre civil lawsuit and retreated from any public royal role, he retained the kind of informal insider proximity that comes simply from being the son of a reigning monarch and the brother of a sitting king. He could still make calls that were answered. He could still walk into rooms that others could not enter. He could still, and in the most fundamental sense, claim to be on the inside of the institution, even when every formal marker of that position had been removed. That is the privilege that has now been taken from him. And the people who understand how the monarchy actually works, the ones who have spent careers navigating its internal geography, are describing the removal in terms that go far beyond its practical consequences. One former senior palace aide, speaking to a royal correspondent in early March 2026, used a phrase that has since been repeated in every significant conversation about Andrew's future. He said, and the words are worth sitting with, that what has happened to Andrew is not the removal of a privilege. It is the removal of a reality. Because for Andrew, being inside that institution, having that access, existing within the gravitational field of the crown, was not simply a perk of his position. It was his identity. It was the answer to the question of who he was when everything else had been stripped away. And now that answer, too, has been taken. Think about that for a moment. Not the politics of it, not the institutional calculation behind it. The human reality of a 64-year-old man who has spent his entire life defined by his proximity to the most powerful royal institution on earth. Waking up one morning to discover that proximity is gone, not reduced, not restructured, gone. The door is closed, the calls are not being answered in the same way. The rooms are no longer accessible. The people are no longer available. The gravitational field has been switched off. And in its absence, Not the question of who Andrew actually is when he is not the king's brother, not the queen's son, not a senior royal with institutional access and implied authority. That question has no comfortable answer. The moment it was taken. Mark the date, March 6th, 2026. Because when historians eventually piece together the full arc of Prince Andrew's relationship with the British monarchy, the events of that specific day will almost certainly stand as the clearest single point of no return. Not the Jeffrey Epstein scandal breaking publicly, not the catastrophic BBC interview of November 2019, not the removal of his military titles in January 2022, not even his arrest on charges connected to the Epstein network in February 2026. Yeah, March 6th is the day the institution moved from managing Andrew to formally and irrevocably excluding him. On that morning, a memo circulated internally within the palace, reviewed by senior staff and signed off by the Lord Chamberlain's office, formally reclassified Prince Andrew's access status within the royal household. The reclassification was technical in its language, bureaucratic in its presentation, and absolutely devastating in its meaning. Andrew was moved from a category of access that palace insiders describe informally as family adjacent, meaning a member of the royal family without current working duties but retaining institutional proximity, to a classification that the same insiders describe with remarkable bluntness as external, not family adjacent, external. The same classification applied to former royal staff who have left the household, to ex-spouses of minor royals, to figures who once had a connection to the institution and no longer do. The memo was not leaked to the press immediately. It was not announced through the palace's official communications channels. It was discovered, as so many significant palace developments are discovered, by the small network of royal correspondents and informed observers who have spent years developing relationships within the household, and who are skilled at reading the gap between what the palace says publicly and what is actually happening inside. Within 48 hours of the memo's circulation, its existence and its essential contents were being reported across British and American royal media. By the morning of March 8th, it had become the dominant story in every publication that covers the monarchy seriously. The palace, consistent with its preferred approach to managing information about Andrew, neither confirmed nor denied the specific details. A spokesman offered the kind of statement that manages to be simultaneously precise and entirely uninformative, noting only that the household regularly reviews its internal operational structures, and that any such reviews are an administrative matter. Administrative matter. That is the institutional language for a decision that sources inside the palace describe as one of the most significant internal recalibrations in the household's recent history. What triggered the March 6th decision? Sources point to several converging factors that have been building pressure toward this outcome for weeks. And by Andrew's February 2026 arrest, which we examined in detail in our previous reporting, created an immediate internal crisis around the question of his continued access to palace spaces and communications. The arrest was not simply a legal matter. It was, from the palace's perspective, a security and reputational matter of the first order. A member of the royal family arrested on charges connected to the sharing of confidential government documents. The question of whether that individual should continue to have any access to internal palace briefings, secure communication channels, or the private spaces where a sensitive institutional business is conducted, answered itself with a speed and clarity that left no room for the kind of prolonged deliberation that had characterized previous decisions about Andrew's status. But the arrest alone does not fully explain the completeness of the March 6th reclassification. Sources describe the decision as one that had been building since well before the arrest, that the arrest simply provided the final and undeniable justification for a conclusion that key figures within the palace had already reached. The man had to be put outside the walls entirely, not managed from within, not accommodated with diminished access. Outside, fully, finally, and without the possibility of quiet reversal through personal appeals or family pressure. The mechanism chosen, an internal reclassification rather than a public announcement, tells you something important about how this decision was made and who made it. This was not a communication strategy. This was an operational security decision. And operational security decisions do not get made by press offices. They are made by people with real authority over how the institution functions. Which brings us to the question that everyone inside the palace already knows the answer to, even if nobody is saying it publicly. Who decided that March 6th was the day? What that privilege actually meant. To fully grasp the weight of what Andrew has lost, you need to step away from the abstract language of access and privilege and look concretely at what those words translated to in the reality of his daily life. Because the gap between how royal insiders describe institutional access and how ordinary people understand it is enormous. And bridging that gap is essential to understanding why the removal of this particular privilege is being described inside the palace as the final humiliation, the one that makes every previous indignity look like a rehearsal. Senior members of the royal family, including those without active public roles, receive regular briefings on matters of national and institutional significance, security briefings, political context briefings, diplomatic updates, the kind of structured, curated information flow that keeps a member of the royal family oriented within the landscape of national affairs at a level that is simply not available through any public source. Andrew had retained access to elements of that briefing structure, even after his removal from public duties. Not the full briefing access of a working royal, but enough to maintain the sense, critical to his own psychological positioning, that he was still connected to the serious business of the nation. That access is now gone. He will receive no more briefings of any kind. He is, in the most concrete informational sense, outside. Consider the physical dimension. Royal Lodge, the property Andrew has been fighting to retain, sits inside Windsor Great Park. Windsor Great Park is royal land. Andrew's ability to move within that land, to access certain areas, to use certain facilities, operated on the basis of his institutional status as a member of the royal family with family-adjacent classification. That classification is gone. The practical implications of what that means for his day-to-day existence at Royal Lodge. Now, a property that sits on land administered by the Crown Estate under the authority of the King, are something that Andrew's legal team is now reportedly working through with considerable urgency. Then there are the relationships. This is the dimension that sources describe as the most personally devastating for Andrew, more than the information access, more than the physical access, more than the security and logistical support, the relationships. 20, 30, 40 years of connections built inside the royal household. Senior staff who have known him since childhood. Courtiers who served his mother, and continue to maintain a degree of personal loyalty to him, even as his institutional status collapsed. Private secretaries, aides, advisors, and in the vast informal network of people whose careers have been spent inside the gravitational field of the crown. Those people have now received a clear institutional signal about Andrew's reclassified status. And institutional signals of that clarity are not ignored by people who have built their careers inside an institution that communicates precisely through exactly this kind of signal. Sources describe a noticeable and rapid cooling in the responsiveness of palace-connected individuals to Andrew's communications in the days following the March 6th memo. Calls that would have been returned within hours are now going unanswered for days. Requests for meetings that would previously have been accommodated, perhaps reluctantly but accommodated nonetheless. Any are now being declined with the kind of formal politeness that means no, and means it permanently. The informal network that had sustained Andrew's sense of continued connection to the institution is dissolving in real time, and there is nothing he can do to stop it, because the dissolution is not personal. It is institutional. It has been sanctioned from the top, and everyone inside that institution understands exactly what that sanction means. One source, speaking with the careful indirection that characterizes palace-adjacent conversations about sensitive matters, put it this way. When the household changes someone's classification, the staff do not need to be told explicitly how to respond. They know. They have always known. That is how the institution communicates, not through instructions but through signals. And this signal could not have been clearer if it had been written in capital letters on the front page of every newspaper in Britain, which, in a sense, it was. William's hand, behind the decision. There are decisions made inside the British royal family that belong to the king. Decisions about state matters, about the formal structures of the monarchy, about the constitutional apparatus of the crown. And then there are decisions that belong to the future. Decisions shaped by the man who will inherit everything Charles currently holds, and who has been moving with increasing visibility and decreasing patience, to ensure that what he inherits has been cleared of the complications, the entanglements, and the liabilities that accumulated during his father's long wait for the throne. The March 6th reclassification of Prince Andrew's access status belongs to the second category, and the fingerprints on it, clear to anyone who has been following the internal dynamics of the palace across the past 2 years, belong to Prince William. Sources with direct knowledge of the discussions that preceded the March 6th memo confirmed that William had been pushing for a complete and formal severance of Andrew's institutional access since the moment the February 2026 arrest became public. His position, consistent with the approach he has taken to every Andrew-related decision since assuming effective operational authority over key areas of palace management, was unambiguous. There could be no half measures, no managed reduction in access, no carefully calibrated middle position that allowed Andrew to remain technically connected to the institution while being publicly presented as separate from it. Full severance, complete reclassification. Outside the walls. Charles, by contrast, had historically been the source of resistance to the most aggressive positions on Andrew. Not because he disagreed with the institutional logic of those positions, sources are clear on that point, but because of something older and more complicated, because Andrew is his brother, because they grew up together inside an institution that both shaped and isolated them in ways that created bonds of loyalty and shared experience that do not simply dissolve in the face of institutional necessity. Because Charles, unlike William, has a lifelong emotional history with Andrew that predates every scandal, every disgrace, and every legal crisis by decades. But Charles, in the spring of 2026, is not the Charles of 2 years ago. He is 77 years old and fighting cancer. He is a king who has, by every credible account, made peace with the reality that his reign will be shorter than he once hoped, and that the most important thing he can do with the authority he still holds is ensure that what he passes to William is an institution capable of surviving what comes next. And what comes next requires Andrew to be outside, fully, formally. Finally, Charles knows this, and according to sources close to both men, he told William so himself. Not in a meeting, not in a formal briefing, but in a private conversation that sources describe as one of the most emotionally raw exchanges between the two men in years. Charles told his son that the decision was his to make, that he would not stand in the way, and that when it was done, it needed to be done completely. William did not hesitate. The memo went out on March 6th. Within 48 hours, the palace's internal operational reality had been permanently restructured. Andrew was outside, and William, watching from his position of increasing authority, had ensured that the door behind Andrew was not simply closed, but locked. Consider what that moment represents in the longer arc of this story. William has been arguing for exactly this outcome since at least 2019. 7 years of pushing against institutional resistance rooted partly in protocol, all partly in family loyalty, and partly in the palace's deep instinct to manage rather than resolve its most difficult problems. 7 years of making the case that half measures were not measures at all. 7 years of being told, implicitly or explicitly, that the situation required patience and careful handling. And now, in the space of a single memo on a March morning in 2026, every one of those 7 years of argument has been vindicated. The family that stopped defending him. There is a moment in the life of any public figure navigating a sustained crisis when the people closest to them make a decision, sometimes consciously, sometimes gradually, and without full awareness of what they are doing, to stop defending them, not to attack them, not to publicly distance themselves, simply to stop, to let the silence speak. To allow the questions to go unanswered and the accusations to sit uncontested. For those who have been watching the British royal family's handling of Prince Andrew across the past several years, that moment has been arriving in slow motion. In the spring of 2026, it has fully arrived. King Charles. whatever private loyalty Charles retains toward his brother, and sources suggest it is genuine if increasingly attenuated by exhaustion and institutional necessity, it is no longer translating into any form of public defense. The statements that emerged in the wake of Andrew's February arrest contain none of the careful language that palace communications teams deploy when they want to signal that a figure retains institutional support despite current difficulties. There was no reference to family solidarity, no expression of the king's personal feelings about his brother's situation, no carefully worded reassurance about Andrew's continued place within the family circle. There was, in the precise and telling language of royal communications, nothing, and nothing in that context means everything. Princess Anne's position is perhaps the most striking of all. Andrew and Anne are the two middle children of Queen Elizabeth II, separated in age by less than 2 years, raised in close proximity inside an institution that pressed them together by circumstance and family duty, even when their personalities and approaches to royal life pulled them in different directions. Anne has never been publicly warm toward Andrew. Finally, and without the possibility of quiet reversal through personal appeals or family pressure, the mechanism chosen, an internal reclassification rather than a public announcement, in the way that tabloid coverage of royal sibling relationships sometimes implies. As she is by temperament and principle the antithesis of everything Andrew's public conduct has represented. She is disciplined where he has been indulgent. She is self-effacing where he has been self-promoting. She is rigorous where he has been careless. But she is also family. And family, in the royal context, has historically meant something that transcended personal feeling and private judgment. Sources close to Anne suggest that the February arrest represented the final dissolution of whatever residual family obligation she felt toward maintaining a posture of neutrality on Andrew's situation. She has not made a public statement. She will not? That is not how Anne operates. But the signals emanating from her household in the weeks following the arrest, and the subtle but unmistakable cooling of any language or gesture that might be interpreted as solidarity, have been read by palace watchers with the same clarity as any formal announcement. Anne has stopped defending him. She has, in the language of the institution, moved on. Beatrice and Eugenie, Andrew's daughters, represent the most painful dimension of this particular chapter. They are women who love their father. That is not in question. The complexity of their position, loving a parent whose conduct has caused them profound personal and professional harm, navigating a public identity permanently shadowed by a scandal they had no part in creating, has been visible in their public appearances for years. The careful blankness of expression, the measured smiles, the studied neutrality of their public comments whenever Andrew's situation is raised. These are not the expressions of daughters who have abandoned their father. They are the expressions of daughters who have learned, at considerable personal cost, how to survive inside an institution that has no mechanism for the kind of uncomplicated family loyalty that exists outside palace walls. Sources close to both women suggest that the March 6th reclassification has forced a conversation within their households about what their own relationships with their father now look like in practical institutional terms. They are working royals. They have roles, patronages, and public identities that exist within the institutional framework that has just formally classified their father as external to that framework. Navigating that reality, maintaining a private relationship with Andrew while operating within an institution that has placed him firmly outside its walls, is a challenge that sources describe as one they are approaching with great difficulty and no obvious resolution. Sarah Ferguson, who has stood by Andrew with a loyalty that has alternately moved and baffled observers across 3 decades of scandal and crisis, represents perhaps the last remaining figure in Andrew's life willing to publicly position herself as his advocate. But even Sarah's advocacy has undergone a visible transformation in the weeks since the arrest. The warmth and determined optimism that characterized her public comments about Andrew in earlier years has been replaced by something quieter. Sources describe her as privately devastated by the completeness of his institutional exclusion and as struggling to maintain the public composure that has always been her primary defense mechanism against the relentless pressure of royal-adjacent life. She has not abandoned him, but the family that might once have stood around him, even at a distance, even in silence, has effectively dispersed. And Andrew, standing in the ruins of his institutional life, is discovering what it feels like to be truly alone inside the walls of a world he can no longer enter. No way back now. Pull back from the specific details of the March 6th memo, the reclassification language, the cooling relationships, and the palace's institutional machinery, and look at the full picture assembled across the arc of this story. What you see is not a man navigating a setback. It is not a crisis that time and careful management might eventually resolve into something more livable. What you see is a final destination, a point of no return that was always going to be reached, given the decisions made and the paths chosen. But that has now been reached completely. There is no mechanism, legal, personal, or institutional, by which Prince Andrew returns to the inside of the British monarchy. The door is closed, the reclassification is permanent, and the people who would once have held that door open, his mother, the institution that deferred to her judgment on his behalf, the family members who maintain postures of neutrality out of residual obligation, are either gone or have formally stepped aside. What does a life outside those walls actually look like for Andrew? This is the question that those who have known him longest are now confronting with a combination of genuine concern and the uncomfortable recognition that his arrival at this destination was not entirely unforeseeable. He is 64 years old. He has no professional identity outside the royal institution that has just formally excluded him. He has no income of consequence, no realistic commercial prospects, and a legal situation that remains unresolved and expensive. He has a property dispute that the withdrawal of institutional support has made increasingly untenable. And he has a public reputation so comprehensively damaged that the ordinary pathways through which disgraced public figures sometimes rebuild a degree of social and professional standing. Board positions, charitable work, memoir writing, speaking engagements are essentially closed to him. The memoir question is worth dwelling on for a moment. In the years following Harry and Meghan's departure from royal life, the memoir became a kind of template for the displaced royal, a mechanism for reclaiming narrative, generating income, and establishing a public identity independent of the institution. Harry's Spare, published in January 2023, demonstrated both the extraordinary commercial potential of the format and its considerable capacity for institutional damage. Sources indicate that the possibility of Andrew writing something similar has been discussed in his immediate circle, that those discussions have collided with two immovable obstacles. The first is legal. Given Andrew's ongoing legal exposure in connection with the Epstein network and the February 2026 arrest charges, any memoir that addressed his own account of those events in any detail would require legal oversight of extraordinary complexity and risk. The second obstacle is institutional. The palace has made clear, through channels that do not require formal statements to communicate their meaning perfectly, that any memoir from Andrew would be treated as a declaration of war, and Andrew, stripped of his last privilege and excluded from the institutional framework that once gave him leverage, is not in a position to fight that war. There is a question that keeps surfacing in conversations among people who have followed this story closely and who retain some capacity for viewing Andrew as a human being rather than simply as a cautionary tale. Was there a moment, a decision point somewhere in the years between the early reports about his Epstein friendship and the catastrophic BBC interview of November 2019, where a different choice could have produced a different outcome? Was there a version of events in which Andrew took the counsel that multiple sources confirm was offered to him repeatedly, acknowledged the gravity of his associations, cooperated fully with investigators, and made the kind of genuine public accounting that might have preserved some portion of his institutional standing and his family relationships? All royal insiders who were present during those critical years are consistent in their answer. Yes, there was that moment. There were multiple such moments. The advice was given, the warnings were delivered, the path toward a different outcome was described clearly and in detail by people who understood the institutional stakes and who were attempting in good faith to prevent exactly the outcome that has now arrived. Andrew did not take that path. Sources offer different explanations for why. Some point to a fundamental inability to accept that the rules applied to him as completely as they applied to others. Some point to the profound psychological distortion that can result from spending an entire life inside an institution that was specifically designed to protect its members from ordinary consequences. Some point simply to the particular combination of arrogance and insecurity that has characterized Andrew's public persona throughout his adult life. Whatever the explanation, the result is the same. The institution has delivered its final judgment, not through a trial, not through a formal public process, but through the quiet, deliberate, and absolutely unmistakable mechanism of an internal reclassification memo and a closed door. William, who will one day inherit everything the institution is and everything it represents, has watched the conclusion of this chapter with the focused attention of a man who intends to ensure that the conditions that produced it are never replicated. The monarchy he is building has no room for the assumptions Andrew made. No room for the belief that blood and title are sufficient shields against accountability. No room for the idea that family loyalty within the institution extends without limit or without consequence. One senior palace source, speaking in the days following the March 6th reclassification, offered an assessment that has since circulated widely among those who follow the monarchy closely. The source said, "The sad thing is not that Andrew lost everything. The sad thing is that he had so many opportunities to lose less, and he chose, every single time, to lose more." That is the epitaph of a royal life that began with every conceivable advantage and ended in the specific, irrevocable, institutional language of a memo that moved a prince from family adjacent to external. The last privilege is gone. The door is locked. And the words that have been passing between palace corridors since March 6th carry the weight of absolute finality. There is no way back now. Prince Andrew did not lose his last royal privilege overnight. He lost it across decades of decisions, denials, and deflections that the institution absorbed until it simply could not absorb anymore. What happened on March 6th, 2026 was not punishment. It was a conclusion. The monarchy has drawn its line. William has seen to that. And for Andrew, the silence on the other side of that closed door is the loudest sound he has ever heard.